and welcome to the third episode of Book Writing Tips, Quick Tips for New and Seasoned Authors, and I am your host, Alba Arango. In today's episode, we are going to focus on POV, point of view. I want to talk about pros and cons of writing in first person versus third person limited or third person omniscient, and yes, I'm even going to talk about the second person, which some people considered very, very taboo. Ooh, so exciting. Anyways, with no further ado, let's get down to it. And what is POV? Alrighty then. As always, this podcast is going to be in two parts. First part, I will talk about the pros and cons of first person and the pros and cons of second person. And yes, there are actually some pros to it. And then second part of the video, I'm going to talk about the difference between third person limited and third person omniscient and what the pros and cons are for each one. But before I get to any of that, let's first establish what is POV or point of view in writing, which is actually a little bit different than it is on social media. So in writing, POV actually refers to the perspective from which the story is told. And that's what we're going to focus on today. If you're just starting a book or if you've been writing a book for a while, you may already have an idea of how you want to write your POV. But this is to give you some ideas of what the pros and cons are to all the different perspectives. So let's start with first person. Now, first person is, for most of you already know this, but for those of you who don't, first person is when you write in the perspective of I. So you are writing in the perspective of the person telling the story. Now, there's a lot of pros to this. It's kind of popular in like young adult, and that is your reader really gets to know the character because the entire book takes place from that character's point of view. So you know everything they're thinking, you know everything they're feeling, you know everything they see, you know this person so intimately that you really have a great idea of who this character is. And you might even get, hopefully by the end of the book, if you're a really good writer, then your reader should know how this character is going to react to situations. So that's a pretty cool thing. I mean, if you're a reader and you really get to know this character and like this character, first person can be a huge advantage for the writer in really developing a relationship between the character of the book and the reader. And if you're writing memoir, I won't say that it's like an absolute must, but most memoirs are written in first person because it's personal. I mean, it's your story. So of course, most memoir writers write in first person, and that brings that level of intimacy that I think you want if you're writing memoir with the reader. Now, this isn't, the rule. If you want to write your memoir in third person, you absolutely can. And in fact, depending on the topic of your memoir, you may personally find it difficult to write in first person. Like it's too vivid for you. And these are memories that you maybe have suppressed but you need to get that story out, and maybe writing in a more objective or third person stand might be more healthy for you. But again, it's your story, so you're going to write it however you want. Just know that most memoirs are written in first person. Now, there are some cons to writing in first person, and probably the biggest one is that first person can be very limiting because you can, as the writer, you can only write what your character sees. So therefore, your readers can only see what the character sees. So if there's something happening in like the room next door, your reader can't know anything more than your character does. So they can hear things or they can smell things, but they can't see it. So they can't actually see what's going on because they're not in that other room. So that can be limiting. You also can't know what other characters think or feel. And yes, I know. But, they've been married for 60 years, so she absolutely knows what her husband's thinking. Yes, I suppose that is, true. But that isn't going to be the case with all the characters there. You're not going to really know for sure what your other characters are thinking or what they are seeing. Your reader can only know what your main character sees through their eyes. So that can be a little limiting. but it is more personal because you really get to know that character. So that's one of those things that you have to decide if you're writing fiction, which way you want to go. Now, if you're writing nonfiction, aside from memoir, first person is often considered not a great choice, only because it may have your readers question how objective you actually are. Because if you're telling it from first person, then you're really telling the readers that, hey, this is what I believe. And yes, though that may be true, most nonfiction does like there to be the sort of element of objectivity, so it's not quite as biased. So just kind of think about that if you're writing nonfiction. All right, let's head to second person. Now, second person, a lot of authors and presenters that I've seen never even talk about it. So what is second person that's considered so taboo? Well, it isn't that it's taboo. It's just that it's not what readers prefer. So most publishers and agents don't really want to receive books that are written in second person. Second person is when you are writing to the reader and addressing the reader as you. So it's basically like you're having a conversation with the reader, and you're personalizing it by addressing them as you. Now, there are some pros to this because that actually can create this sort of intimate feel, like the reader is like right there with you because you're addressing them in your story. However, it's not very common, which there's reasons for that. And probably the biggest one is because, it's not popular with readers. Because yeah, it works for short stories and you can absolutely write a short story in second person, but you've got to think about if you're writing an entire novel as a conversation, but it's a one-sided conversation. It is literally like you are addressing someone who can't speak for an entire novel. Because you're addressing them as you, but they're not talking back. The reader can't talk back to you. So you're writing an entire novel as a one-sided conversation. And for readers, that is hard for an entire novel-length book. Short stories, yeah. Short stories, sure. That's pretty cool for a short story. But a novel? This is why it's not very popular and why most people don't even address it. So if you're going to submit a second person, just make sure it is out of the park phenomenal, because most agents and publishers will not even consider it and may even ask you to rewrite it in either first or third person. Okay, before we get to third person, it's time for our crazy law / writing prompt, part of my favorite part of the day because I love writing prompts. So here you go. Today's crazy law. Once a time in history, in Hawaii, it is against the law for anyone to insert pennies in their ear. How kind of a cool law is that? And what on earth do you think they happened that made them create an actual law? Okay, there you go. That's your writing prompt for the day. All right, moving on. Third person. Now, third person is divided into two. You can write in either third person limited or third person omniscient. Let's start with limited, which is definitely the most common perspective that people write in. Third person limited is when you are in one character's point of view at a time, usually the main character, but it's not personal. You're not using I. So say your main character is Steve. You're always addressing him as Steve or he said or whatever like that, but you are in Steve's head. Now, you don't have to remain in Steve's head. You can actually do things from other characters' points of view, but just make it very clear when you're shifting to another point of view. So for example, if you have two characters and, there's a dangerous situation and one of them is about to walk into another room, you can be in your main character's head watching him move into the other room. But now that he's in the other room, you want to be in that character's point of view because you want to show the reader what that character is seeing in that other room. So whenever you do that and you change from one character's point of view to the other, make sure you do like a scene change. And when you're writing, that's as simple as double tab. You double tab to put a little space between it, and then you start in the other character's point of view. And this is a great way, and this is, of course, one of the definite pros in writing in this way, is that you can be in more than one character's point of view. You just have to be very clear that the audience understands whose point of view you're in. If you do it too often, that's called head hopping, and readers don't like it. In fact, most readers prefer the majority of the book to be in one point of view. However, if you have two main characters, it's definitely acceptable for you to go back and forth between the two main characters. And usually that's done in chapter breaks. So one chapter will be this character and then the next chapter will be the next character. And you definitely want in the chapter heading for the reader to know which character this chapter's head is going to be in. But that is a great and probably the most common way to write is in third person limited. Now, the cons of writing in third person limited is it can be less intimate because you are in more than one character's head. So you're not in one character's head for the entire book. It can be a little less intimate than writing in, say, first person. And it can, and this is definitely something I will address in a completely different podcast, it can lead to telling, not showing. So because if you're in first person, then you're literally the person telling the story. The narrator is the person telling the story. But when you get to third person, you more have like a narrator, and the narrator then can start telling of what's going on in the scene as opposed to having the characters showing what's going on. And again, I'll address show, don't tell in another episode much more in depth. So just be careful to not switch too often between your characters because that can be very distracting for the reader. And again, one last time, because I can't say this enough, make sure you let the reader know that you're changing characters with either a scene change or a chapter change or something like that. Now, moving on to third person omniscient. I will tell you, it is very difficult to write in a third person omniscient. Not that it can't be done, because it absolutely can be, but it has to be really well written in third person omniscient because it's tricky. It is tricky to write in third person omniscient. So the pros by the way, third person omniscient means that the narrator has access to all the characters' thoughts all the time. So think of like a fly on the wall watching everyone and being able to be inside everyone's head. And I know that sounds like super cool. Like, oh, that'd be so cool. Cause then you could really see like what everyone's thinking and what, everyone's feeling at the same time. And yes, it does have definite pros. It's very objective. You're not biased at all because you are literally seeing an event from everyone's perspective. However, the cons are probably why many people find it so, including myself, very difficult to write. It is a very detached form of writing. The narrator has to be a consistent voice, regardless of whose head you're in. So you can't be like, oh, now I'm in Jennifer's head, so I'm going to be like this sort of like sassy, and then you can't. You're a fly on the wall. So you literally have to have the same voice throughout the entire book, a consistent voice, regardless of whose point of view you are in. So even if you have very complex and different characters, the narrator has to have the same voice through the entire book for it to be a well-written, omniscient book. And that, at least for me, is really hard to do because I get really into a character's personality, multiple characters' personalities. Not that I have multiple personalities, or maybe I do. I don't know. You'll never know. But writing from omniscient means your narrator has to be like consistent. And for me, that's really hard to do. But a lot of people find that really hard to do. So, but that is a really cool perspective. And there are a number of books you can see out there that are really well written third person omniscient books. So now you have all of these different perspectives and you have to decide which point of view you want to write in. And if you're not sure, some of you may know, I will tell you I have 2 different book series, and one of them I have written, my J.J. Bennett Jr. Spy series, is in first person. All 5 books are in the same first person because I love that character and I wanted all the books to be from his point of view. And then a second series I have, which is The Decoders, is written in third person limited because in that one, I did want to be mostly in the main character's point of view, but he has 2 best friends and I want sometimes for the, to see what those friends are doing because they're detectives. They solve mysteries. So I want you to see, what is happening with this detective and what they're seeing when my main character isn't in the room. So once you decided, then you kind of know where to go. But if you're not sure, here is a suggestion. Take one scene that either you have written or you're going to write and write it in first person, and then write the exact same scene in third person limited, or omniscient if you want to give that a try. And then compare the two. Read them out loud to yourself. Which one sounds better? And you can even have someone else who's never read the book or never read anything you've written and have them read the two. If you belong to a writer's group, have other writers read the two and kind of get an idea of what, as readers, they prefer, which way they prefer the scene to be written. And that could give you an idea of how to go about it. So there you go. I hope this gives you some great ideas on point of view and what the difference are and pros and cons. If you liked the video, please like, comment, subscribe, and tune in next Wednesday for my next episode, and I will see you all then.